So please help me welcome Robert Hughes.
Thanks, Matt. And thanks to all of you for being here. It's good to be back at Elk River Books. We're fortunate to have Elk River Books in this little town.
Yeah.
I'm going to read from Twisted Green. I'll start with chapter 1. Read the whole chapter. Then I'm going to move forward a little bit, read from several places in the book. I'll try to give you some idea of what the book is like, and I hope you like it. Hope you like what you hear. So without further ado, I'll start chapter 1. Terry Penchant trudged slowly up the steep mountain path, high on the crest of the ridge above. The route was made up of 2 parallel tracks on the hillside. Penchant knew it was used by equipment and workers' trucks. A typical 4-wheel drive vehicle with high ground clearance could make it all the way up. He didn't want to take a chance of damaging his car, so he walked. It wasn't that far. He picked his way along the rocks, placing his feet carefully with each step. It would be easy to twist an ankle on the loose stones, and yet he was relieved finally to be alone. The meeting he left a half hour ago had been a painful ordeal. Lawyers for both sides arguing as only lawyers can, sniping at each other in vitriolic legalese. The partnership in which Terry was a half owner planned to develop a, quote, sustainable luxury community, unquote, named Paradise Preserve, on this prime piece of Montana real estate. They claimed the project would benefit all stakeholders, the wealthy, members, Geyser County, visiting tourists, and even the environment. That last one was a bit of a stretch, but they figured it would play in the target upscale market. Some rich folks like to assuage their conscience when purchasing luxury vacation homes. The Paradise Preserve would mainly profit Terry and his co-investor, a mysterious silent partner based in Chicago, whom he had never met. Terry had invested his life savings in the enterprise and mortgaged his home to finance his share, an all-or-nothing gamble for a man with a wife and a kid. But the potential payoff was in the millions and within a year or two. The partner had a local guy representing him, a logging contractor named Seth Delmer, who lived a few miles north. Terry had found Seth to be unreliable, hard to deal with, and all-around pain in the wazoo. Terry wondered where Seth was. He hadn't shown up for either the lawyer's confab or the planning meeting at the county offices afterward. Terry hated meetings. Seth had been dropping out of sight recently, leaving Terry to represent them in public. This lack of accountability had caused Terry a hell of a lot of grief, especially today, when he attempted to answer pointed questions from the Montana Earth Barricade mouthpiece about compliance with state soil and water quality laws. He'd been hung out to dry and he was pissed. As Terry passed a grove of stubby junipers, he thought he heard a faint noise above him. He craned his neck to look higher. Nothing. He worked his way upward. The smaller stones on the path rolled under the smooth soles of his street shoes, causing him to slide with each step. The first available lot was just over the hilltop ahead. This particular parcel was considered prime, sellable at somewhere in the area of $2 million, give or take. The surveyor had sent him a text that morning saying that the built-side corners, well and septic, had been marked with stakes and tape. He pulled his phone from his back pocket and brought up the satellite mapping app. The place where the terrain was scraped level by a bulldozer lay just ahead. There it was, a roughly rectangular leveled-off area of a few acres marked with wooden stakes, wrapped with bright pink plastic tape. A future trophy second or third or fourth home of a mere 10,000 square feet, for some megabucks pursuer of the Montana dream. Part of the philosophy of the project was to keep the homes relatively small, in keeping with limited impact on the environment. Though the average American home was only 2,000 square feet, this prospective residence would be considered a modest retreat for a member of the preserve. The home construction cost would be at least $7 million. 10 mil land and construction seemed like a lot, but would no doubt appreciate fast in the rampaging local real estate market. A mega popular television series about a dysfunctional Montana ranching family had accelerated demand for this type of property. The TV series, though supposedly located adjacent to nearby Yellowstone National Park, was actually filmed hundreds of miles away. A black Ram pickup sat on the far side of the build site, the cab apparently empty. As Terry stopped next to the first corner marker, a familiar man stepped out from behind the truck with a rigid smile on his face and a black handgun clutched in his right fist. "What the hell?" Terry said. The man stepped toward Terry and raised the gun, pointing it squarely at Terry's chest. "Hey, let's talk. I mean, come on, man." No need for talk. The assailant pulled the trigger. Terry heard a loud bang, then felt a brutal punch in the chest. Standing as he was, with his heels lower than his toes, he fell over backward, his head slamming into the hard ground. A hole the diameter of a piece of construction rebar had appeared in his chest. But he was beyond registering such things. In fact, Terry Patchett was dead. The man rolled Patchett's body up in a large blue vinyl tarp. He slung the parcel into the truck bed and slid the retractable bed cover over it, closing it tight. He inspected the ground where Patchett had fallen. No visible blood. With a boot, he scuffed the place where the body had landed just in case. He figured his tire tracks would not be a problem, since the surveyor and the contractor's employees routinely used the road to access various build sites. In any case, the gravel road surface was bone dry. He drove slowly down the access road, lost in thought. He'd never shot a human before. An avid hunter, he'd harvested numerous deer and elk, but this was different. His hands began to shake on the steering wheel. He found it hard to get enough air into his lungs, but he couldn't falter, had to get away. What if someone heard the shot and investigated? He took scant comfort in the $50,000 he was to be paid for the hit. Hit? Jesus. Okay, that's the end of chapter 1. As advertised, started with a murder. Later in the book, Scooter Berman, lawyer for a disgraced former financial executive who's now in prison, travels to Springfield, Illinois to obtain a pardon from the governor. Scooter Berman followed Peoria Road into Springfield and then 9th Street to the Capitol complex. As a history buff, he knew that there was a really interesting National Historic Site for Abraham Lincoln's home near his destination, the State Capitol building. But today there would be no time for sightseeing. Nolan had promised to relay A. Hamilton Massey's request for clemency to the governor of Illinois, Hollis D. Langdon III. Berman knew that Langdon came from a wealthy family that had made a fortune manufacturing hitch assemblies and other parts for railroad freight cars starting in the 1880s. Berman parked in a lot at the domed Capitol building and walked inside. In the lobby, there was strict security, including metal detectors, a pat-down, and briefcase search. Uniformed Illinois State police officers were scattered around the common area, reflecting added security since a band of crazies plotted to kidnap the governor of Michigan in the fall of 2020. The men and women of the security detail in the Illinois Capitol were under strict orders to take no chances. In the vast marble-floored lobby, Berman found a stairway and ascended to the second floor. The steps were wide but not very high, making them awkward to negotiate. Not an athletic man in the best of circumstances, he nearly stumbled a couple of times on his way up. At the top, he walked into an entryway leading to a large sunlit marble plaza beneath the Capitol Rotunda. He asked a waiting state trooper for directions to Nolan's office. The cop made him show ID and called to confirm that Berman was on the appointments list. He stopped at the administrative assistant station just outside the gubernatorial domain. A woman with straight gray hair looked up from her keyboard. Help you? Walter Berman here to see Ed Nolan. I have an... A nasal voice came from behind the woman. It's okay, Rose. Let the man in. Good to see you, Eddie. You look prosperous, Berman said. He noted the substantial belly straying at the waistband of Nolan's suit pants. Nolan frowned. Well, you don't exactly look poor. Come on, Scooter. Berman followed Nolan into his office, a space big enough to qualify as a two-bedroom apartment in Chicago. Marble everywhere, including a wood-burning fireplace. An interior door was open, revealing a spacious bathroom. Berman took a seat across from Nolan, now enthroned behind his aircraft carrier desk. Let's get business out of the way, Nolan said. I spoke with Hal about this thing yesterday. He's on board. Of course, discretion is essential. Expeditious submission of the consideration will be expected. Fine with us on all accounts. A wire transfer will be forthcoming as soon as we have appropriate assurances that the paperwork has been finalized. Tomorrow, okay? Nolan sighed. You know, the pressure on the governor is immense. I mean, he runs every 4 years. He has to fundraise every friggin' day and most nights from here on out. This deal we're talking about, it's a necessity for him. Nothing wrong with it. Your client, he's nonviolent, no threat to society. I know all that. I've got no problem sleeping. Let's just move ahead. Are we good? Listen, you've been around. Nothing's going to be in writing. Our verbal agreement will have to suffice. Naturally. But would it be possible to have the governor provide assurance to me personally? I'm afraid that won't be possible. You see, the door to Nolan's office suddenly opened, and a tall man with fine facial features entered. The smile on his lean face seemed genuine, but Berman knew it to be well-practiced and not necessarily sincere. Coatless, the governor wore a pale blue dress shirt with faint white stripes and French cuffs, fastened by oval brushed gold cufflinks. How lame did he said, as he extended a hand with long tapered fingers like those of a concert pianist. Eddie tells me you're an old friend. Langston's eyes were blue and bright, like chips of stained glass catching the light. Walter Berman, yeah, he and I go back a ways in Chicago. Great, how may I help? I understand you and Eddie here have discussed the matter involving my client residing in East Moline Federal Prison. We have, and I am, an agreement that we must do something to alleviate the injustice to your client. And he, coincidentally, desires to support your efforts in a perfectly legal manner so that good government may continue unabated in this state. Berman congratulated himself on delivering this line with a poker face. He waited for a rejoinder. Langdon clapped his hands like a child delighted by an unanticipated Christmas gift. Good, he cried. I like doing business with a man who likes doing business. We'll get the required action done as soon as the benefaction reaches the committee. Is that fine by you? Berman nodded. He knew the committee was the super PAC organized by close supporters of the governor's next re-election campaign. Technically, the PAC was independent of the campaign, but in fact, it would spend millions advocating for the governor's re-election. The law provided that the advocacy expenditures could not be made directly to coordinated with the campaign. Nevertheless, the PAC would advertise heavily on TV in favor of the governor and against his opponent, not unlike hundreds of other such PACs linked to politicians running for office. Langdon dropped into the visitor's chair next to Berman and crossed an ankle over a knee. Now that that's out of the way, who's going to have the better b-ball season this fall? The Illini or DePaul? Berman noticed that the governor wore ultra-thin pink socks with tiny clocks woven into the silk fabric. Langdon noticed him noticing. I've always been a sock man. Don't know why. Maybe a little touch of style. Berman paused for a beat. Then, to answer your question, I say DePaul. No contest. The governor stood and beamed down at Berman. I believe you are correct, Mr. Berman. Anyway, good to meet you. Keep in touch with Eddie. The bright smile emerged again, and then he rushed from the room as if his trousers had instantly caught fire. Now a little bit further in the book, on a massive ranch in Montana. Robert Wolfe arrived at the William Oldhorn Dinosaur Museum a few minutes before his graveyard shift would begin at 1 a.m. He approached the front entrance and waited for the night guard, Joe Yellowtail, to come to the door and unlock it. Wolfe eyed the parking lot over his shoulder as he waited, empty except for his old Chevy Impala and Yellowtail's Tacoma pickup. The security lights near the parking lot and over the front entrance glowed. The night was cool, and the wind nearly calm. With the new moon, the sky was black. The stars shone incandescently. A set of keys rattled from the other side of the door. Wolfe pulled the door open and entered carrying the bird cage he brought with him every night. A cloth covered the cage. The clicking sound of claws on a wooden perch came from inside. Sounds like Fred's restless this evening, Yellowtail said with a smile. Yep, can't wait to get to work. Once Yellowtail had left and Wolfe had punched in on the digital time clock, he pulled the cover off the birdcage, revealing a large green and yellow parrot. The bird blinked a few times as its eyes grew accustomed to the light. Then he squawked once as if clearing his throat. Bite me, Jack, the ferret proclaimed. That's not very nice, Fred. Who's a good boy? Give me a peanut. Wolfe unfolded a newspaper atop the reception desk and set the bird cage on it. Then he pulled a bag of dried peanuts from his pocket and slipped one to the bird through the bars of the chromed metal cage. Fred grabbed the peanut in his sharp beak, chomped it as steadily as a combine working a wheat field. Finished with this morsel, the bird eyed Wolfe silently. Never once had Fred said thank you when given a treat. Oh well, you can't buy gratitude. Fred the parrot shuffled back and forth on his perch, muttering to himself. An occasional profane word could be distinguished. Wolfe sometimes had to apologize to people for Fred's crude language. He listens all the time, picks things up. His previous owner was a pretty rough customer. If he swears at you, it's nothing personal, he'd tell people. He checked both doors to the rear of the building along the north wall. The deadbolt on the steel pedestrian door was set. Likewise, the heavy roll-up cargo door was shut tight and locked. He returned to the front of the building, sat at his chair behind the reception counter, and retrieved from under the countertop his current book, Fool's Grove by James Welch. He had covered about 40 pages when his eyes drooped closed. and his chin lowered to his chest. Soon he was asleep in his chair. This was not an unusual occurrence for Wolf. He'd often nod off for a few minutes for what he called a cat nap. He'd never neglected his duties, nor had he been caught asleep by anyone. Nevertheless, he knew he had to be careful. Around 2 a.m., a noise suddenly awoke Robert Wolf. Sounded like a vehicle going by the museum, traveling slowly along the west wall. Maybe a light truck. Something was wrong. Fred yelled, "What the fuck?" Wolf immediately sprang from his chair. There's no reason for a vehicle to be outside the museum at that hour. He turned to the video monitor atop the reception desk and selected the image from the camera mounted on the roof on the west side of the building. Nothing unusual. He tried the camera over the cargo door in the back. The screen was black, no video feed. Weird. He grabbed his flashlight and walked back to the pedestrian door adjacent to the cargo dock. Placed an eye to the people, completely black. Normally he'd see the glow from the floodlight mounted above the doors. Had somebody obscured the people, turned off the light, covered up the camera? "Who's there?" Wolf yelled. No answer. Sounded like someone moving around. He knew he should immediately call the sheriff's department on the landline at the reception desk. No need to risk his own neck. And yet maybe there was some innocuous reason for the unusual incident. Maybe somebody was lost, or it could be kids pranking him. He'd look good if he handled the problem himself. He decided to just have a quick look out the door. Wolf entered in the 10-digit code on the alarm system keypad to the right of the electrical panel. The small screen indicated that the alarm system had been switched from armed to disarmed. He twisted the knob of the pedestrian door's deadbolt lock and then the doorknob. He opened the door a couple of inches and shined his flashlight into the night. A man wearing a black ski mask faced him with something in his gloved hand. The man chopped down at Wolf's forearm with a hard object. The flashlight fell from the guard's hand and clattered to the ground. "What the hell?" was all Wolf managed to say before he was struck on the head. He lost consciousness and slumped to the floor. Okay, now moving to near the end of the book. If you've seen the cover of the book, you'll notice a logging machine. It's called a feller buncher, and that's actually a character in the novel. And it comes into play in this next part I'm going to read. Suddenly the engine of the feller buncher revved to a roar. The machine advanced steadily toward Garcia. The tree grappling column extended in front like a poisonous snake moving in for the kill. Garcia stumbled as he backed away from the incoming menace. He fired twice at the bulky machine when it was only a few feet from him. One bullet missed completely, while the other hit an upper corner of the windshield. Bits of tempered glass fell like hail into the operator's cab. The contraption kept coming. Garcia darted to the side like a toreador stepping out of the path of a charging bull. The machine thundered by, narrowly missing him, as well as Brian and Darcy. It slammed into a copse of fir trees off the edge of the clearing, snapping branches and finally coming to a halt against several thick trunks. The engine continued on, and the massive caterpillar treads spun in an attempt to gain traction. Finally, the engine stalled, and the tracks stopped. The abrupt silence stretched out like a membrane on the verge of tearing. The only ones left were Brian, Darcy, and Garcia. No sound came from the direction of the feller buncher. Garcia walked to the logging machine, climbed atop a tread, and reached up to the door handle of the cab. He yanked the door open. Seth appeared to be unconscious, his head lolling to the side. There was no sign of blood, so maybe he'd been knocked unconscious when his head struck the cab interior. Suddenly, his eyes sprang open, and he swiveled and kicked Garcia in the crotch, knocking the smaller man to the ground. Garcia's head slammed against a rock, stunning him into oblivion. In a flash, Seth fired up the Feller Buncher and backed away from the trees. He rumbled the machine over to the fallen Garcia and stopped. Garcia lay on his back, dazed, but slowly coming to like a boxer down for the count. His boots were only inches from the huge steel saw blade, capable of decapitating the largest trees in the mature forest. He struggled to his feet, staggered, and nearly fell again. The steel column rose off the forest floor by a few inches. The articulating boom snaked forward with astonishing speed, and the two sets of shiny steel tree-punching arms wrapped around Garcia, trapping him in an imprisoning embrace. He attempted to get out of the steel enclosure, but it was no use. He stood on top of the terrifying circular saw blade, all too aware of its potential for mayhem. That's it. Thanks for listening. I'll be happy to answer any questions, and then after that, I'll sign some books.
So who done it?
I can't tell you that. You have to read the book.
Very good. Thank you.
That piece of logging equipment, I learned about it when in our neighborhood east of Livingston, we had a Russian olive removal program. And the idea was, that they're invasive trees. And so the logger came in and with a machine like the one on the book cover. And I saw the thing in action, grabbing trees, cutting them off. The blade at the bottom is 4.5 feet wide. And it's truly impressive to see it working. And so it kind of gave me the idea to revisit that in a story. So,
How effective was the Russian olive tree removal project?
that was kind of mixed. Some of you in the audience know.
Yeah.
We got rid of thousands of them. They're huge piles, and a lot of them were chipped. But there's still piles left, and this is, 5 years later? They're emerging from the ground.
Yeah, and we also understand that the water carries the seed and they
Yeah.
plant themselves. So, yeah.
Who brought the Russian olive trees here?
Happened in the 30s, I think.
They grow really well.
Yeah.
Still a conservation
I
service.
suspect it was the Italians.
No, still a conservation service. The government brought them for restoration and wildlife habitat.
Soil
Pardon me?
Soil conservation.
Oh, still a conservation service. Promoted Russian olive plants.
Yeah. Yeah, they used to sell them in nurseries, and
In the 60s.
people liked them because they grow fast, they look good, and they work as a shelter belt.
I'm curious about the book, going back. Yeah. How was this process writing this one versus your other two? Did you
Pardon me?
how was the process of this one writing it versus the first two?
Well, I thought it would be easier writing the third novel in a series. I know the characters pretty well, and but it was actually tougher. I found that I'd used up a lot of good material in the first two. And but then as I was writing it, I ended up with probably 400 pages. I ended up editing it down to 350. But yeah, and probably have enough material for another one, but we'll see.
How soon?
Yeah.
So is nature kind of your focus for your story? Things that happen in nature?
Could you say that again?
Is nature kind of a focus for your story because you saw these trees and thought of,
Right.
mhm.
Yeah, it's
Or is it what's happening in Montana
mm,
with people,
Yeah.
rich people coming in and taking over?
yeah. Yeah, the characters do kind of take over the story. And I found that in short stories too, and magazine articles. If you really know them, the plotting kind of takes care of itself. And so it's nice to revisit characters you've written about before.
So Bob, my question is, you've got all these different threads, right, that are coming together. Do you chart that out? How do you make it all hold together? That's what's amazing to me when I read a book like this, that it sticks together, and I don't know how somebody brings it all
Yeah, that's really a good question. One thing I do is I keep track of where I am in the story. I figure roughly so many chapters, so many pages, scenes, chapters, then events that happen. I do a real rough outline. I just type up like 5 pages of telling the story. And then as I write it, I get diverted from it. And it goes off in different directions. And toward the end, I just abandon the outline. But it kind of flows. But, you know, I had a career as an accountant in Chicago, and that discipline comes in handy, I think, for a mystery writer to keep track of. You know, it's a big project to get your arms around, and you don't want to go off on a tangent, you know, and then have to rewrite. And then at the end, after you think, at least in my case, I thought I covered all the points in the plot, pulled them together, you know, resolved it all, didn't leave any loose ends. I go back and I check it, and 1 or 2 other things pop up, loose ends pop up, and I have to write, say, a telephone call or a scene or something to pull it together. But it's just, you know, some people, some novelists write outlines, or like a third the length of the book. And that probably works pretty well for keeping all the elements, keeping track of them. But I think it's better to just be more loose about it, but then go back at the end and make sure you have covered all of the things that you've raised. You introduce a character, and the character has to do something, maybe go away, come back. You know, whatever the character did has to be resolved. You know, if somebody asked a question on page 40, somewhere in the book you have to answer it. You know?
So, Bob, do you have a writing regime from like 9 to noon every day, or are you as disciplined in that as you are as an accountant?
You know, Bone Mountain, the first novel, I wrote 500 words a day, religiously, and that worked great. And I got it done pretty quickly. And then the second one, Dirty Money, I started that way, but there was so much hiking and skiing to do that there'd be days when I got nothing done. And then sometimes even months when nothing was done. But I'm in a writer's group, and we meet monthly. And part of the pressure, there's some pressure to produce. So when you go to the meeting, you have something to read to the others. So that helps a lot.
Cool.
And that's the main way I'm able to keep plowing through the novel. Stephen King says he He writes 2,000 publishable words a day.
Oh my gosh.
And he works 6 or 7 days a week, he says. That's just, to me, unimaginable. But, yeah, but 500 words a day is probably a pretty reasonable goal.
How many pages is 500 words?
About 2.
Really?
Yeah, that's all.
Wow.
But that's, some days that's really easy. Some days, it can take 8 hours to do 2 pages.
Do you start at the beginning and go to the end, or do you sort of jump around?
She was asking if you start at the beginning or if you jump around.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I wasn't quite sure, but yeah, I do start at the beginning. And it's linear, chapter 1, 2, 3. No, but maybe you'll notice in Twisted Reed, I have something I'd never done before. I went back in time a little bit, and then forward again to the current time. But that, some writers do a lot of that. Some playwrights do a lot of that. But anyway, it's, you'll see in Twisted Greed, by the way, Nancy, at the top of each chapter it has the day 1, and ends with about day 20. So you kind of keep track of where the story is. That murder at the beginning is the very first part of day 1. And so basically it's 3 weeks' time.
Does alcohol help the words flow better?
Yeah.
Single malt.
Does alcohol?
He asked if alcohol makes the work go better. Alcohol?
Oh, yeah, I remember alcohol. Some of the characters in this novel one of the characters drinks Canadian whiskey. And he's a bad guy, and he drinks the whiskey to get his courage up and to enable him to do some of the awful things that he does. But as far as writing is concerned, I think staying away from alcohol really helps a lot. It'd be pretty tough to write a novel while drunk, but it might be kind of interesting.
Do you have nightmares at night after you come up with a real gruesome murder?
I've thought a few times when I'm going to sleep about that logging machine.
Well, that does seem pretty inventive. I don't know if I've ever heard of a logging machine being an instrument of death or menace before.
Yeah, thanks. That's why I used it. The only publication I've seen pictures of logging machines in was a logger's journal. I think most people would find that just seeing a machine like that in action, it shakes the ground. And it just, it's a really impressive thing to experience. You don't want to get too close to it.
It is run by a human being, though.
Yes. Yeah, there's an operator in the cab. The cab looks like a video game. There's a good sized screen and there's 2 joysticks and, it all, a good operator, like, anybody who's good at construction equipment can do really precise things with that machine. So, well, thanks again for being here.
Thank you.